All right, we've got time for a couple more questions. In the back, yeah.
I appreciate what you said about the Norwood and how the Section 8 units made all the difference in terms of the 24-hour period. How did you get those? And were they for the families or were they for the special needs populations?
They were through the state. HFA got them for me. I don't know how exactly they did that. And they were for the 8 supportive units, partly because you get the biggest bang for the buck, because the differential in HUD fair market rent for a studio versus what our rent would be was bigger than any of the other unit sizes. So we got, we'll net more money that way.
I guess I'd like to follow up on your comment, Jessica, about the Olmsted involvement. That's going to bring in people with developmental disabilities in a way that I don't think, I'm from that community and I'm new to this and I look around the room and I don't know anybody. So I don't know what experiences you've had in working with our bureaucracies. We certainly haven't had much experience in working with yours. What do you see as particular challenges and opportunities to having us at the table with you?
Sure, I'm glad you're here. So I think that's the next phase of integration, right? We've already worked on getting the supportive housing, kind of formerly homeless universe into the mainstream affordable housing finance world. I think incorporating the OPWDD world into supportive housing is the next piece. One of the things that we want to work on that's alluded to in the housing plan is looking at some of the other types of rental subsidies that are available and making them better utilized in the mainstream affordable housing world. So OPWDD has several different rental subsidy programs that they don't think of them as rental subsidy programs, and they don't have the same type of paperwork associated with it that you can bring to a landlord, like here's a Section 8 voucher, it has my name and the rent and the unit size on it. So I think working with OPWDD to look at their subsidy programs through that lens is going to be the number one thing in where our biggest constraint is rental subsidy. Any programs that have that, such as the nursing home diversion waiver program or the individual support subsidy through OPWDD, making that look like a rental subsidy from a developer's point of view, from an underwriter's point of view, is going to be a huge step forward in making that happen.
Yeah.
My question is on the reserves, Alan. I think you said it was a 5-year term on the OMH funds. So how did your syndicator investor look at the reserve question in terms of having to deal with something that wasn't 15 years out?
Yeah, so the question is about setting the amount of the reserves for operating maintenance and debt service. So it used to be like 6 months, and now it's creeped up to 9, 10, 11 months. As far as the OMH contract goes, even though it's technically, I guess, a 5-year renewable thing, they've never, ever not renewed. So from an underwriting point of view, there's some level of comfort. I know there's always the first time, right? But that would be like a state financial crisis. I happen to live through the city's financial crisis. I know when things stop, it really can stop. But anyway, enough so that it's never not been refunded. They got comfortable with that. But they get more comfortable with, cash sitting in an account that will cover literally 9 months of complete billing operations, complete debt service. Gives you a little more wiggle room, and the tax credit investors as well as the lender.
And you had to fund that out of your developer.
Out of the developer
rather than
fee.
the project budget.
It usually is from the project budget. I told you that was one surprise, like you said. You don't know, so that was a surprise that came later in the process.
Same for us.
Yeah.
We have the same reserve levels, and it's coming out of the paid developer's fee.
Yeah.
I think just
It's
as
part of the structure.
Just as a comment on that, I think the agencies recognize the fact that the developers are taking risks and need to be compensated. We're not going to be successful if we push away the groups that that need to be compensated for their risk. So it's not to say that the full amount can be paid, but I think that there is an effort to try to fund the reserves and other key elements through the budget so that there is a modicum of fee that can be paid either cash or deferred. Yeah.
I just wanted to add to what Alan said. I'm a geologist for Bank of America, and I was the investor on this project. One of the key things for us in underwriting a supportive housing deal and underwriting a subsidy that may be only a 5-year subsidy, even a 15-year Section 8 subsidy, we always look for language from the maintain this as 100% or whatever the percentage was of supportive housing. I mean, there are certain programs in the city that would require 30% of the units to remain permanently homeless, and we account for that in our underwriting. But just so you understand that reserves are not intended to keep this operating as supportive housing necessarily. And that would be everybody's goal, including ours. But we look at the worst case scenario.
And you understand that if the supportive housing unit, theoretically by the documents, if that person wasn't there in the supportive unit, we have the right to rent up to 60% AMI. So, I mean, what happens to the person in the unit, I don't know. But by documents, we were able to raise rents.
And that's probably been the single most challenging part of some of the supportive housing special needs lenders, coming into an environment where we're working, playing in the sandbox with the big kids about what happens to that homeless requirement if the subsidy that enables it is missing. So we never dealt with that before we had private lenders in there. We just said it has to be homeless forever. I don't care if you lose Section 8. I don't care if you use your OMH contract. And it was what Alan said it had in his PowerPoint. Just trust us. We'll work something out if that happens. We never included language about what might happen if those subsidies disappeared. And now that we're working with a variety of other lenders who are bringing real money to the table, we have to be a little bit more flexible in that. And that's probably been the biggest challenge of working with people. It's not, from our perspective, been the debt or the underwriting or that kind of piece. It's really been what happens if the homeless subsidy goes away.
We probably spent more time talking about doomsday scenarios, the risk of which are, practically nil, than we spent talking about anything else. And when you have that many partners, there's a lot of doomsday scenarios to consider.
Right.
And it's one of the reasons I mentioned having good partners, because I have to tell you, when you have a room full of attorneys all looking at these regulatory agreements and you're trying to having somebody who can translate that into English and negotiate on your behalf and push back is critical. These are not, as much as you think they are, cookie cutter boilerplate agreements. There are a lot of discussions that go on around the edges of these agreements, and there is some room, and having somebody to represent you is really essential because it goes right over my head. I'll tell you.
And both of these deals, we were negotiating in the midst of sequestration and a federal government shutdown. So what we used to be able to say is, that's a doomsday scenario. I'm not underwriting. My famous line used to be, I'm not underwriting to Armageddon. That's not what we do. And then it was like, it is doomsday. Doomsday is today. There's no one at the federal government to call to talk about the Section 8 program. So that was an added challenge that made us.
Okay, last one, yeah.
I just wanted to piggyback on your question regarding the reserves and why was it in the budget and not in the budget. The reason basically is you have a lot of agencies making requests. So you have an OMH that might request, let's say, $100,000 in reserve. Then the syndicator might request another $600,000 or $700,000. At the end of the day, you might have $1 million of requests for just reserves. That has to come from somewhere. So it's either HFA putting in another $1 million in subsidy, either MRT or regular subsidy to fund that, or the other agencies are not necessarily going to put in that extra money. So what we request as HFA is if someone else is going to put a request and they're not providing those funds, then the onus should be on the developer. And if the developer has to put some of its fee in, we prefer that than to give another $1 million to use for just reserves when we can finance another project. So that's the logic behind it.
Great. Okay, one more.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow up with a comment. I'm Jim Foley, I'm the State Office of Mental Health. And one of the reasons that I think Alan mentioned, we've never not paid a contract. And I think the main reason of that is we're not really a housing agency, we're a social service agency. So there's a human element to that. I mean, what would happen, it would be a much bigger crisis if these contracts went awry, so that's important. I think that's what helped make, the comfort level in a lot of these deals. And it's true, we've never missed payment contract. So I just kind of want to piggyback on that. Just remember what you were saying.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Help me thank the panelists for being here.